In today's video, I'm going to talk about Native Americans, early colonial America, and maple syrup making. Behind me you'll see there's a maple tree with what is a modern day maple syrup hookup. If you want to come over here, you can take a peek. You can see with a modern hookup how it drips and collects. But what we're going to talk about today is colonial America and how Native Americans were tapping maple trees long before Europeans ever came to this country. In the Algonquin woodland eastern region, Native American tribes have been tapping maple trees for centuries, even before Europeans showed up. And now what made Native Americans start tapping maple trees is really unknown. Some say that a chief at one time threw a tomahawk and left it into the tree, and when he came back he saw syrup was coming down. That's one legend. Others just say that it was passed on from generation to generation. How it started is really irrelevant, but what is known that it was being done before Europeans ever showed up, and Native Americans were some of the first to show settlers in colonial America how to tap maple trees. Which in colonial America, the tapping of maple trees and making of maple syrup was a really common thing. It became really well practiced and throughout the colony, so much so that tooth decay was very common in colonial America due to how much maple syrup was actually being consumed. Now, what Native Americans would do is they would drill a hole into a maple tree using any sort of various methods, whether it be a bow drill or any sharp instrument. But once a hole was put into a tree, maybe a few inches, not that deep, what would be inserted would be a tap. Now, as you see here today, modern people use metal taps. The Native Americans before European contact didn't have metal taps, so what they would make would be a tap made out of a strong hardwood, and this tap would be sharpened at one end and hollowed out, and then that would be pounded into the tree like so with the exposed end. Now when you do this, you do it at an angle so that the syrup could run down, and this was done in late February and early March. And the reason that would be done is because sap would be running best once the temperature started to warm up. Now, once the tap was inserted into the tree, Native Americans would use birch bark or some other form of bark to make a bark basket, and then this would be hung underneath the inserted tap, and this would be left overnight and to collect sap, and then the next day they'd rise. And then to keep the birch bark container watertight, they would use beeswax to line the seams of the bark container, and that would be what would hold it, and that would be what would make the container liquid tight. Now, what was that? Now, the fact that the syrup actually comes out liquid form, as you saw, is the way it comes out of the tree, but what it ends up being is Native Americans often would harden this, and there was a couple different ways they could do that. One way is they would leave it out to freeze, and over time when it froze, the sap being denser than water would coagulate to the top and the ice could be broken off. And when it was actually in a hardened form, you could eat it just raw like that, or you could dry it out for a more long-term solution, and it would be eaten like candy because it would be easier to keep a hard-formed treat versus the liquid container as you see syrup today in the store. But if you were to leave it in the liquid container, the Native Americans would put it into pots and they would boil it, clay pots obviously prior to European contact. They would boil it down until it became a fine syrup stickety form, and then that would be the syrup you would know and love today in your stores. And then sure enough, as soon as colonists would come around, there would be the copying of Native Americans, and they would start to make maple syrup, and this became very common in the colonies and in the New England area, so much so that festivals and camps would be set up around maple trees around this time, and it would become very, very popular in early colonial America to tap maple trees and make maple syrup. But the fact of the matter is that it was something Native Americans were doing long before European contact. I hope you guys enjoyed this video. If you did, please hit that like and subscribe button. It helps me out a lot. And I hope to see you guys watching my videos in the future.